crossfade or something. So at the very least, knowing how to use middleware like Fmod or Wise. But if they know how to integrate audio directly in the engine, that's good as well. But it depends on what they're after.
Okay.
The other thing is just making sure there's somebody that you get along with. It's like any hiring process, any contractor, anything like that. You need to make sure that you gel well with them because you're going to be working closely with them. So yes, they need to have the talent and the sound that you're looking for, and ideally the technical knowledge. Otherwise, that'll be a big learning curve for them. But you just want to actually enjoy them as a person. Like we love those people we work with that are like our best workmates or something like that. It's the same concept.
Yeah, and you make an important point too there that you're going to be working with them directly and communicating with them a lot. So how they communicate information and everything else, I think is probably more imperative than anything else, because as we'll get into this a little bit further, like communication with this medium can be a challenge in itself too. So knowing those things up front, like you said, getting to know them a little bit and seeing if you gel and having that time also be made to set expectations is probably really important, in addition to the other important skill sets and that they need. So yeah, and I
Absolutely.
like. And I like how you your response is pretty simple for the most part. I mean, I'm sure we could go into tangents here about like all the certain qualities, but as far as I was concerned, I was like, wow, these sound perfect. If I ever had a need to really look out and put out some kind of essentially a job posting, I'd feel confident asking for these things and being well prepared to go on that hiring hunt. So thank you.
Yeah,
for that.
absolutely. That's right. The other thing I wanted to say is because your audience is obviously game developers, they may not. Well, I mean, it's probably a varied audience, but I would say primarily game developers looking on how to market their game. The thing is, there's no need for them to know all the technical music stuff, right? Like leave that to us. So I didn't want to sort of go down that rabbit hole because it sort of would be on deaf ears, I would say.
Yep.
But another big benefit you could look out for is if it's a small team, which I would say most independent games nowadays are either solo devs or small teams of maybe 2 to 8 people. Just depending how economically viable the game could be. They could benefit severely from somebody that can do a hybrid of tasks. So like a composer that also can do 3D asset building, like game art, environment art, that sort of thing. Or the classic hybrid that would probably suit it the best would be a sound designer and a composer. So somebody that could make sound effects, ambiances, that kind of thing. And any other game dev skills like programming, I would say would be quite helpful as well. Just knowing how to use a game engine really is important. So,
and I'm sorry, you mentioned about was it design and composer? Or those two elements, or just if you don't mind, could you elaborate a little bit more on what those different tasks are? Because I know that there's at least with that one you mentioned, it seems that there could be potential overlap with composer compared to audio engineering or anything along those lines.
Yeah, no problem. So a composer is basically somebody that makes the music for the game. A sound designer traditionally would be somebody that mostly does sound effects and sort of implements those into the game. However, I'm noticing that the landscape is shifting a bit, and a lot of AAA companies are hiring audio designers, and that sort of covers the whole thing. So that would sort of be where the hybrid is coming into play, where you not only make the music, but you have to implement it into the game. So either using middleware or the game engine itself, and you need to make the sound effects as well. So I think that is becoming the norm because maybe the market is shifting, and because there is so many composers out there and sound designers, it's sort of like, all right, well, you got to have all the juice now.
Okay. No, thank you for explaining that, because I think it sounds like now, because of the shift and everything, it's important to kind of know those things too, and understand like where some people might be a little bit more have been more focused in areas too, and that's okay if they are, but just understanding that better in terms of, where does it meet your needs, your project needs, and are like, yeah, you can hire a composer, but if there's someone else who's willing and able to help out in other areas, you could be getting a lot more value out of that particular individual based off of your needs. So I'm glad you detailed that out a little further.
No problem.
All right. So another thing I want to talk about too is, when devs are looking for a particular musician or composer, that has a particular style, let's say, like you can hear, samples on SoundCloud and everything, and they have a particular, really focus on a particular area, right? But could there be benefits in broadening the scope and looking at a more versatile composers or musicians?
Yeah, I would say versatility is important, especially if the direction of the game changes, or different levels would require different sorts of music to evoke different feelings. Different parts of the game too. Like if you're doing a boss fight, you almost always need that epic, excuse me, that epic feel. So I do personally see the benefit in a broader scope, specifically to kind of blur creative lines. So I think that nowadays you have to really have innovation in your music. So sound design within your music is very important, not just taking a bunch of presets and just slapping it on a MIDI track and making like just a basic melody. You really need to have a feel, right? Because when we think about music and video games as a whole, the whole intention is to evoke a specific feeling to your players, whether it's just pure enjoyment, whether it's like Phasmophobia, where you're trying to just scare the bejesus out of them. Yeah, the main thing is, even if you do want to niche down and find a composer that has a very specific sound that you're after, like this is obviously why people hire, say, Lena Raine or Mick Gordon, because they have a very specific sound that suits certain games. I mean, obviously they're far talented than I personally feel I am just yet, but they're goals, so eventually we'll get there. And I think as long as you have a unified message with your music and the game as a whole, then it's fine. You can have different sounds for different levels, different, I guess, events within the game. I think that definitely, yeah, you're going to have to. You can't just have it always one note or, just super chill and ambient the whole game, unless you have a hyper casual game or just a relaxing sort of survival game or something like that. It's all about just keeping a unified sound, making sure that it's not jarring when you go to different areas. And so
yeah, no, it's and I think that's part of where the real art and really understanding and communicating your vision too, because having that range, but also having the range be unified is that I think that's where the challenge can lie, or whatever. So there's that level of consistency, even if there's some level of dynamic to it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you want something that's going to change and progress as the game goes on, no matter what kind of game you're making. But you can change things like instruments. You can change themes, which are basically the overlying melody of the track, like a motif or leitmotif, as they call it. So, when we think of Banjo-Kazooie, I'm going to come back to that because I just, that hits the heartstrings. Grant Kirkhope relies very much on the melody to carry the song, right? So it's very playful, upbeat, but adventurous. You could change the instruments to be almost anything, right? Like he's using flutes, banjos, all these different things that you don't typically hear in music these days, or at least, video game music. Well, no. You hear it a lot in video game music, not so much like commercial pop or anything.
Right. Yep.
But it's the overlying theme and the feel that you get from his composing. So I think that's critical. So it doesn't really matter if they have a broad background or interest in music, or they cover a bunch of different genres. I think that's actually an asset more than a hindrance. But it's really just making sure that it suits what you're after, which is up to the communication between you and the composer.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, I want to try to shift things in a different direction here, and one we mentioned earlier, and which is essentially around understanding the process, because let's face it, this process is quite a bit different. And I can speak from personal experience working with you, just simply because it's like, how do I get what's in my head to you in certain ways and things like that, right? So I was hoping that at a high level, can you break things down for what a typical process may be like for when devs start working with a musician?
Yeah, of course. So I'll leave all the like onboarding and contractual stuff out of it.
Right. Yeah.
I don't have a place right now, at least in this question. There's a person called Akash the Car. He's fantastic. He goes into a lot of detail on this, and he has a free course if any game developers are interested in that, and freelance sound designers. So I'd recommend that if you want information on that. But in terms of the process from start to finish, I'll keep it really high level. But you would want to, I guess, explain as closely you can the feeling you're trying to evoke. Again, I keep coming back to the feeling because that's really all that matters. You don't need to go into technical detail and say, I want a really bright mix. I want heavy distortion, but this kind, I want it to feel really rumbly, like really get those low frequencies nice and distorted. We don't necessarily need that. I mean, if you know that knowledge, that's fantastic and that will be helpful. But I think the biggest thing is to just give reference tracks or reference video games and say, play this for 20 minutes and, this is the feeling that I want to evoke, or at least very close to this. Or even explain different situations that make you feel a certain way. Like, if it's a very sad game, maybe explain the process of grieving over someone you love. Something like that. Not so much the technical detail. Like, don't get fixated on that. You don't need to go into those kind of details. I would say reference tracks are huge. So if you have either video game OSTs that you are a big fan of, or if there's just commercial music that there's like a bridge or a chorus or a hook that really has this feeling, or these certain sounds that you're looking for, this timbre, send that through. That's important. I think what happens is, we get fixated on the little details, whereas it's sort of bigger picture that you need to do. And then as you get further along with your revisions, so I send you through, say, draft 1 of level 1's theme, and you say, oh, no, I really love this, but, can we change this instrument to be something else? Yeah, of course. Do you have the instrument in mind? No, I just know I want it to be like plucky, like sort of like a, I guess, banjo or something like that, or a plucked guitar.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, just any kind of stringed instrument that you pluck to play, like even a violin with staccato or anything like that. So I guess like the revision process, it can be ongoing. The games can usually take, 1 to, I guess, 5 years, even more than that. I've heard game developers say, just release it. I think if a game takes 5 years, I think you need to call it and just move on, in the best way. Like, obviously you don't want to release a bad game, but, is there any other detail you're looking for, Andrew? I guess the process is always going to change depending on the contractor and the developer. But I guess step 1 is always just get really clear on what you want the outcome to be. Step 2 is potentially give them a demo or anything like that. I think especially with the saturated market, you can definitely afford to have demos from multiple composers to make sure that you're getting the right fit. And revise, give clear feedback on what it is you're wanting. If it's a specific sound, or if it's just the melodies aren't quite right, try to know what it is. And I know that's difficult for some people that maybe aren't musically inclined, but just try to analyze what it is you do not like or you do really like, and give that feedback.
Yeah, no, I think that's, well, first, that's basically what I was looking for. And to that last point too, I remember when we were creating the theme, it like, and this is a thing too, I think might be an interesting point to keep in mind. When you're working with a professional or a composer, that I would, and this is how I kind of went in with Dakota here too, is like, hey, you know what you're doing. Give me what you think is good, and then we'll talk if we need to change things. And then when it came down to like that revision process, I did my best to provide just some maybe slight changes to the melody where I thought it might work better. But I still love that you brought that forward in terms of what you thought would be really appealing and stuff too, because I mean that's important, and I learned a lot from that too. But yeah, just being as clear as possible, and I'm just trying to think if there are people that aren't necessarily musically inclined, what are good ways. And